Well, that's the thing I was thinking to myself is I fucking wrote down here. It's like, see, at this stage, why don't we just let them dope up whatever the fuck they want? You know, like just make it legal, and that'll become part of it. Just give everyone the same drugs. I don't know, man. Like
Maybe
at
like
this
you could
stage,
even like put them into the second category. It's like, do you want to watch this guy run the 100-meter dash in 10.5 seconds, or do you want to watch this guy do it in 4? Like,
yeah, exactly. They're putting plutonium up his arse or whatever, you
they
know.
have to like increase the size of the stadium to like do the javelin and stuff like that, and the long jump.
Yeah, folk are like breaching orbit now.
They're
You
doing
know, a
they're doing
couple
the
of
pole
years.
vault now without the pole sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
3, 2, 1. Yeah, so I've been caught up in a bunch of like Olympics videos this week. I watched all the Phelps races. I watched like
Right, yeah.
Usain Bolt winning the world record, which by the way still amazes me that he like got the world record and was like showboating for like the last like 15 meters. You ever wonder how
Yeah,
fast?
fractions of a
You ever
second. Yeah,
wonder
he
how
should have made
like
it.
he could have been like 9.5, like lower. That always like pisses me off that he did that actually, and didn't.
Aye.
We don't know what the fastest, because at the next Olympics he was much slower.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know that'll go down as a clip in history, isn't it? How fast the fastest man could have been.
Yeah, I think the
And
woman.
now the skateboarding as well. I've just been fascinated as well, man, of all these video clips of YouTube of Olympians.
Yeah, the skateboarding was like much better than I thought it was going to be as well. I wasn't like they
But
said
they're little kid, man.
skateboarding at the Olympics. I was like, oh okay. And then it came on, and I was like right into it,
Fucking cool. Yeah,
Even the
yeah.
fucking gymnastics, to be honest. I'm like sitting and watching that as well, like the floor routines. Like the guy like lands and he does a wee hop, and I'm like, oh, you'll get marked down for that.
Oh, he's fucked
That's
that one up,
negative
hasn't he?
0.1 right there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Tom Daly's diving in. I'm like, what a fucking shocking entry that was.
Yeah, well, the splash on that entry was terrible. Although seeing those ones, the diving, they go down, they do the same thing, they go into the water. I'm like, that was a great dive, and the score comes up and it was shit. And I'm
I
like,
know.
nah.
Very poor diving.
So if you didn't know, this is Guide to the 21st Century, a conversational podcast between two friends, Lewis and I, discussing topical issues and trying to navigate the minefield that is life in the 21st century.
Each week, Scott and I, we think of a topic that's been in our mind and we bring that to the show. Basically, the idea is that we'll take this topic and break it down amongst each other, disseminate our views, give our opinions, and try and reach some type of conclusion that maybe we wouldn't have reached on our own.
So the Russians went at this Olympics, Lewis.
That's right. But, you know, if you'd actually seen any of the medals, you would have seen that there's a little symbol which kind of looks kind of Russian-y, and there's a bunch of Russian people speaking Russian turning up there.
Yeah.
So I thought it would be quite a relevant topic. It's because what I want to talk about this week is directly related to that, because it's also to do with performance-enhancing drugs or doping. And as obviously everyone, I'm sure most people that are watching the Olympics this year will realise that Russia, obviously back in 2014, the Sochi,
Yeah, I
yep,
think Sochi.
got it. Yep, Sochi Olympics happened, and like there was the biggest doping scandal in history. It turns out there was like 1,000 Olympians from Russia's team or something like that had been like being given performance enhancing substances in this like literally a state-ran illegal doping scandal that's been going on for apparently decades. And as a result of that, they ended up being banned for a couple years. But people are looking around like, why the fuck are Russians back this year? You know, why are they competing?
Well,
And,
it's not Russia though. It's the Russian Olympic Committee. Very,
Right.
very different. The people are
Yes,
the same. The athletes are still from Russia, but it's totally separate. You see.
Yeah, it's different. It's because there's no national anthem. You don't hear the Russian national anthem now. So, right, you know, it's different.
Yeah.
Like the Olympics Committee
Night
are
and day.
not counting these medals, these golds as Russia's.
Right.
But Russia are, you know,
Sure.
in terms of their record keeping, they are. But yeah, so basically, to paraphrase, I kind of thought it'd be quite good for you and I to kind of have like Olympics are on right now. Let's try and get like a bit of an overview of our idea of our head about this, what's happening with doping right now in the scene. And just kind of a bit of conjecture, really. It's because I don't know about you, but see, throughout most of my life, my understanding of using like performance enhancing drugs in sports, whether that's like steroids or like anything, any one of these substances that are considered uncompetitive, it was like I always thought this was like one of those like, you know, well kept secrets that everyone, no, not poorly kept secrets that everyone knew was happening, but everyone at the same time is like vehemently saying, oh, it's very wrong, you know. I don't really, and I'm quite looking forward to what you have to say. It's because you're much more into sport than I ever am.
Sure.
I only hear it from an outside perspective. So for me, it's always been like one of those things that's like always been there, always happened, but it doesn't seem to be getting any better.
I'm not sure how it was like maybe 30 years ago, 40 years ago, or but before like standards were as like stringent as they are today. I think in today's society the standards are quite strict, and I think a lot of the medal winners have to go and do a test like straight after
Yeah.
each every event and stuff like that. Um, I think I'm not sure if this is true or not, but my understanding of the situation is right now that there are a bunch of like the board that certifies all these substances as illegal. There are like a bunch of substances that are illegal, and there's basically everything else.
Hmm.
And I think that everything else everyone is doing. So like as
Right.
long as it's not illegal and it can somehow enhance your performance in some way, shape, or form, I think they're pretty much doing it. I don't know if you ever keep up with the tennis, but I was actually reading this scandal earlier, maybe last month or something like that. It was Maria Sharapova, was like one of
Oh
she
yeah.
was like a tennis champion like
Hmm.
10 or so years ago, and she got caught in a doping scandal as well. She's actually from Russia, and it turns out it was like a substance that she was already taking was like made illegal in like 2014 or something like that. But then
All
it
right.
got found in her system like that March, so it was like she ended up getting like a 2 year ban, and she was like, oh, she claimed that she never knew. Maybe she did know, maybe she didn't. Who knows? But I think like it's just a prime example of if a substance can enhance your performance and it isn't illegal, they are all taking them. And then that's a prime example of it became illegal. She didn't stop taking it and she got caught out. So I
Right.
think
Mhm.
anything they can get away with, they will, and I think they have to in today in the hyper competitive market that is like today's sporting like atmosphere.
Mhm. Yeah, that's kind of a lot of the opinion I've got when it comes to like modern pharmaceuticals. This has a huge effect on doping. Just to go back to that previous point though, like you questioned like how bad doping was back like 40, 50 years ago. Apparently in like Olympic level, like top level performance, doping really became a bit of a problem. This is somewhat anecdotal. I don't know if this is true. It came from like a Netflix documentary, but it all came about during the Cold War. Because apparently during the Cold War, the Olympics were actually supposed to be held in Moscow, and there was this worldwide campaign of boycott the Olympics. That was like the first time the Olympics were boycott. Well, I don't know if it was the first time, but it was a major time for the boycotts were limited. The Olympics were boycotted,
Yep.
and like 90 countries or something like that refused to go there. And this was like because it was the Cold War. It was kind of like that thing where everything between Russia and the USA became like a competition. So naturally, it became like a nationalistic fever thing, and apparently that was when Russia actually started their like doping programs, like their state-sanctioned doping programs, was in order to get a competitive edge over in America, and they've been doing it for like decades. And like I think what I've seen to see is that you're right. Like what we have is a situation in which there's like thousands of chemicals that can potentially increase your performance. Like we said at the beginning there, we're not talking about growth hormone. Growth hormone is like outdated shit. Like that's you don't these days the Olympics. So what they'll be doing is they'll be like stacking various drugs. One will increase like oxygen aeration through the body. Another one will be burning fat. Another one will be like fucking working on your brain type of thing. And they'll all be working in these really complex ways. And I guess like I was thinking from my perspective the other day that like I can understand how it would be quite easy for a pharmaceutical company to come up with a new drug and for someone that has connections to the industry to realize that's probably something that we could give our athletes to help them perform better. That's the type of thing that I can imagine have quite a quick turnover rate. But identifying that that is being used, that that's being practiced, that it shouldn't be used, and then coming up with a test for that, it's like seems like such an inordinate amount of work. Like it almost seems obvious when you think about it in that way that PEDs are like so prevalent because how the hell do you track these things?
I think there are even like I can't I don't know if this is true or not, but I think there was a problem like not too long ago where people were starting to develop like substances that you could like take before races and things like that, and then it was like out of your system by the time you got tested.
Mm,
So I'd
mm-hmm.
imagine that the advances in the pharmaceuticals and the substances they are taking, it could be so much as like a momentary like adrenaline rush that your body like immediately burns off or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
As these things get more and more advanced, it probably will become more and more difficult to like track them. So I don't know how they're
Right.
going to keep up with that.
Well, that's what kind of is amazing me, because apparently, like, see, one of the, from what I seem to understand, every couple years there's another scandal that comes out, and everyone is like, I can't believe they were doing this, I can't fucking believe it, type of thing. The most recent one was Sochi, where we found out the entire like Russian Olympic team was doping. Obviously the major one before that was when people found out that it turns out the entirety of professional road racing, basically everyone in that sport was doping. And obviously Lance Armstrong, he was kind of crucified. He was the main poster boy of doping because he'd had so many professional wins. But one of the ways that they were doping was via blood transfusions.
Sure.
They'd literally
Yeah.
like take blood out, oxygenate the blood, and then put it back in. Like, they weren't even adding chemicals, like traditional chemicals, to this blood. Like, I don't know how they even discovered that in the first place, but like the methods that we're talking about here are like really quite fucking intense when you think about it. I don't know how they found that out. The obvious ones are like people popping pills and stuff like that, but it's obviously more sophisticated. The question though, that like, in order to have like a better idea about this, I think we should probably start and ask ourselves, who, like, why do we see doping the way that we see it right now? Like, I can understand from an individual point of view, if you're competing, you want to do well, you want to win, and because you'll get the recognition and stuff like that, you'll get the prize money or whatever. So I can understand a person wanting to cheat the system in order to take pills. But what we're talking about, like the highest levels of sports, we're not talking about individuals. We're talking about coaches, we're talking about managers, we're talking about representatives, and we're talking about the actual organizations that are in charge of these sub teams in themselves. And it's like, who can you see? Who can you see outside of just the competitor benefiting from people doping? It's because this has to be something that's being facilitated on a larger than an individual level.
Yeah, I guess there must be some correlation for Russia if they're all doing it. Russia, as long as I can remember, for the Olympics, and I normally keep a fairly close eye on the Olympics when they come on. Like, it's like Russia, the USA, and like China. They're on top of the medal tables like every single time, and I think Russia are they disproportionately on top? Like, I'm not sure if they should have that many gold medals, like based on their population, things like that.
I actually think it might be the opposite. I think China and Russia have much less compared to their population, because the populations are quite large.
Oh, okay. So I guess Russia probably did it. Like, it's obviously an institutionalized thing there. It's not. I don't think it's the athletes choosing to do it. It's probably like someone at the top, like organizations that are like choosing to sort of medicate their athletes to make them better, so to like inflate their medals to like make them look better, make them superior.
Nationalistic pride, yeah.
I don't know, but there must be something associated with like the winning, whether it be monetary value or I guess the idea of like having the bragging rights, like being superior to these other nations. That might be a factor. It's probably like in the organizational stuff, that's probably where it comes from. I think on like an individual level, and the individual athletes that are doping, they're probably doing so because either their sport is so competitive now that they can't possibly be expected to like win,
keep up,
or like keep up. Yeah, that's probably the reason. Because I mean, like, you look at the Olympic athletes now. Like, I was watching the swimming the other day, for example, and see the guy that won the gold in the breaststroke is like a British guy, and apparently he's the fastest guy ever to do the breaststroke ever. And he comes out of the pool, and he's honestly like sculpted from like marble. He's like,
right. He's like an Adonis.
I've never seen anyone with a more perfect physique for swimming. Like, these massive broad shoulders. He's got this huge chest. He's got rippling six pack. He's so
stringy legs, probably
streamlined to fuck. I'm like looking at this guy, and I'm like, there's no fucking. Like, we're at the peak now. Like, you're the fastest breaststroke swimmer ever. Like, nobody's beating you. It's like, we're at the peak. For somebody else to win a gold medal, you'd have to take drugs. So you'd have to cheat somehow. If this guy's like the fastest ever, and he's probably on all sorts of shit as well. He's taking all the legal stuff. So it's like, in order to beat him, we have to do the illegal stuff now. And whether it's you as an individual that's choosing to do that, or maybe your representation or the organization which you represent, it's to win at the end of the day. I'm not sure if they get like a bunch of monetary gain from the Olympics, but there must be some sort of gain for them to do that.
Yeah. I don't think it would be a type of lump sum type of thing, but just like having the prestige, I imagine would affect you over the course of your life. To go on a bit of a tangent, I won't try and go on it for long, but I was watching a video the other day which was talking about the progression we've made in the Olympics over the years. Because I was thinking to myself, like, it seems like every year or so we're breaking new world records, and I was like, that's not human beings getting better. We're not evolving. So I was thinking to myself, like, is that because like doping is becoming more prevalent? Is this like, are we actually seeing that in the records type of thing? And it was quite interesting because basically this video disproved that theory, and it was just talking about how it's actually the improvements in the technology that we are seeing these massive gains for. So like, for instance, like Freddie Merckx, for like years and years and years and years, he was the fastest cyclist in the world, like by like a margin. And he managed to there's like a record which is how far you can cycle in an hour, and he did it in like cycled like 30 miles or something like that. I don't exactly remember. It was around about that. And over the years, people eventually bet that record until they had went a further 5 miles than he'd achieved in that same hour. And that's just due to like better braking systems, more aerodynamic carbon fiber, like his helmets and the lycra and that type of thing. This is what these improvements come from. But the committee that was in charge of the cycling records, they decided that people that want to go for that record now, you have to wear the equivalent equipment that Freddie Merckx wore back in the 70s.
Sure.
So they had to get like a spec bike and stuff like that. And now his record has only been beaten by like 300 meters. Like all that 5 kilometers distance that we saw in improvement is just the technology. So like that's so much of what we're seeing in the sports these days is coming from coming from improvements that way, which is slightly tangential, but super, super interesting.
Well, it's the same, and I watch an awful lot of ice hockey, and in ice hockey they talk about Wayne Gretzky a lot. He's known as like the Great One. He's got more points than anybody else in the NHL ever had. He's got scored more goals. He's got more assists. He's got basically all the records in the game. He was like far and away. Well, he was the best of his time by by the statistics, by some margin. But you look at all the players like today. The players today are like way faster. They shoot way better. But they also have all this like great equipment. So like you look at the players today and you look at like videos of him back in the day. He's like shooting against goalkeepers that have like terrible equipment, like tiny little pads.
Right.
They have terrible sticks and
yeah.
stuff like that. You look at the goalkeepers today; they have these massive pads. They're so agile. They're mobile over the place. It's way harder to score goals now. But the technology is like so much more advanced, and the science behind,
The game,
the physical science that they have is like so much better. The training regimes that they go through are much better. The facilities that they have to train in are so much better. So like it does make you wonder how much of it is like a product of his time. And as the technology is slowly but surely increasing, I think we're now starting to see like a decline in how much technology is increasing ability.
Yeah.
So over the years, like that record would have been beaten, and eventually it was like 5 miles more than what he cycled. But even the technology will like peter out, and that's when I think we start to see things like doping start to take a bit of an upturn.
Yeah. And as well as that, as well as the technology teetering out, eventually what you tend to find is that sports become more competitive, is that the body shapes of people that are competing in these sports become more optimized. So like, before, apparently, is it NBA that's basketball in America? Is that
NBA,
yeah. Apparently, like NBA players, when they like are in like the major leagues, they're entitled to like shares within their team. So basically, anyone that goes into NBA and they make it on a big team, you're going to be like absolutely loaded. No matter what you do, that's a really, really, really good job. And as soon as that rule went out, basically like 50% of NBA players all of a sudden overnight jumped from like the average height of 6'3" to like 7 foot. Just because the people that were more optimized for this sport were getting pulled up by people, by like organizers and producers. And now, like, I think that there's like, if you're over 7 foot in America, there's a 17% chance you work for the NBA, just because that specific body type is so highly desired. Like rhythmic gymnastics, the average height of a competitor is 4'9",
Right.
just because that type of form fits gymnastics better. And exactly like you said, like that swimmer, you tend to find the swimmers, they want to have much longer arms in their legs. So like, see if you had like the Vitruvian Man of like Leonardo's man, you wouldn't have like a square and a circle with like Michael Phelps. It would look completely fucked up because they don't fit natural body figures. But the point of this is that exactly like you said, what happens when sports get to this level that we find themselves at is that it becomes like super, super, hyper competitive, and medals stop getting, and records stop getting broken. When I was thinking though about why we're seeing doping there, I was thinking not just in terms of like the teams itself. So I can understand, kind of foggily understand, why Russia would be incentivized. You know, there's like nationalistic pride and potential monetary gains and influence and that type of thing to be achieved through what, like winning at the Olympics. But I was also thinking in terms of like, you know, like the International Olympics Committee itself, like the actual organization that hosts and events and publicizes the Olympics. It makes sense to me that they would certainly not be incentivized to stop doping apart from public perception, right? They want like athletes that perform really well. Does it sell to you that that would generate more revenue?
I I guess it would. You know, I mean, obviously you're excited. Like people watch. If you think someone's going to break the 100 meters, like when
To have more fan base.
when Usain Bolt ran that race in Beijing, and it was like really exciting. He's on the line, like. You know, I watched it. You know, I watched him beat the world record, and it was like it was really exciting. And watching people beat world records is really exciting, and I guess that probably does drive viewership. Although I personally think it's a bit sad that something like the Olympics is about like generating revenue. Like I know it's good for
No.
it's good for the country that like that hosts it. You know, they get a lot of like tourism and stuff like that. People buying tickets, all that stuff. I'm okay with all that, but I guess I guess maybe the viewership is a part of that. You know, the adverts on television and stuff like that. It is a bit it is part of like making the money. But I think the Olympics used to be like an amateur thing. Like it never used to be like a professional sports
That's right. That's right.
like
Yeah, like
body.
people that were on the world stage, they wouldn't be in the Olympics. You
No, it
know.
was like an amateur thing, and you turned up and like if you won your medal, that was like great. And I think that's what the Olympics should be. I don't mind that professionals are like taking part in the Olympics because I think it should be the best of the best at playing the Olympics. But I kind of hate the idea that it's for money. I feel like the athletes should like they shouldn't make any profit from it. Like it should be something that they play all their world championships and stuff like that. Like make your money, make your profession there. The Olympics should be like every 4 years the world gets together and we do something that lifts the morale of people that watch it.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like a good sport. And the idea of countries like doping to win like gold Olympic medals, it's sad because countries like Russia who can afford to do all that stuff, who can dope, will be right at the top of the medal table, and they're maybe preventing smaller countries from like getting a gold medal. I watched the women's triathlon the other night, because when the Olympics comes on, I'll watch fucking anything.
Sure.
And this woman, fucking 2 hours it was, watched it all. This woman from Bermuda, this woman from Bermuda,
For you, man.
she won gold, and it was like the first gold medal Bermuda had ever won. And it's like the island is like 26 miles long, and that's like less distance than she ran, like in the triathlon itself. And it's like that's great. That's fantastic. Imagine Bermuda just now. There's like 1,000 people or whatever. They're all like
parties in the streets.
they're all
Yeah.
like celebrating.
It's like Ecuador. They got their first gold as well, I think, this Olympics,
So
didn't they?
that's like a fantastic thing, you know. I love to see stuff like that. You love when Britain are doing well in the Olympics, and it's kind of sad that countries make it about winning all the gold medals and like doing all that stuff because you kind of want to see these lesser known countries and the idea that anyone can join the Olympics and can take part, and if you train hard enough, if you're good enough at what you do, you'll make it, sort of thing. That's kind of the spirit of the Olympics, right? But it's not really upheld with the doping scandals and these massive
No.
countries trying to dominate the medals tables.
Yeah, it's like what I was saying to you just before we started recording there. Like, it fucking, it's why I'm so pissed off that like so much of like the Olympics now is owned by, it's so much of the coverage of the Olympics is owned by in Europe by this company Discovery Plus. So it's like, this is something I feel should be like a humanitarian thing, like this should be to spread the message of what people can achieve once they set their sights to it, and what if they have this support circles. Like, this should be an examples of greatness, and like you said, it feels like it's been kind of ruined in some way by bringing financial incentives into it. And that's where I was kind of leading on to this with this question of whether you think that the organizations themselves will have a stake in this. Is because in like the reading I've done, which isn't a huge amount of reading, this actually seems like it's pretty well understood within the industry that basically the organizations that have direct control over like the Olympics and the broadcasting of the Olympics, they seem to have various conflicts of interest. And I'll give you a little bit of to give you a little bit of background. So you have the IOC, which is the International Olympic Committee.
Yep.
And that's literally the company that like hosts the Olympics, that broadcasts the Olympics. They deal with like the licenses. They deal with like they generate money from the Olympics. That's the company that is looking for the end goal. They have like massive revenue. Back in the 90s, when doping started becoming big and people started noticing that it was a difference, that people and the fans really started having getting upset about it, and the players as well, it was decided that we need to have some type of third-party organization that will deal with doping, and that was where they came up with WADA, which is the World Anti-Doping Agency. And the idea was that WADA and IOC were completely separate entities, and they were obviously couldn't influence each other, because the idea was that people thought IOC would have a massive conflict of interest, simultaneously trying to sell tickets but at the same time trying to stop athletes from competing. Like, you know, you can see how one of those might not directly correlate with the other. So the idea was they made WADA, and on the most part it seems like WADA do a good job. Like, they try to do the right thing. They're introducing new testing methods, but the problem I've seen is that they're like seem to be incredibly weak. Like, their national budget, their yearly budget is like 30 million, and that is to basically vet the teams of Olympics like across the world. Like, this is a worldwide agency that deals with doping, and they're given 40 million pounds a year. They have 130 staff members, you know, and they're supposed to deal with all the drug sample analysis in the entire world. So what ends up happening is you just have privately owned labs that deal with drug sampling that has like a WADA certification. So like basically there's no certification, there's no like actual overseeing of the event going on whatsoever. You also find that 50% of the funding of WADA comes from the IOC. So, you know, these are not at all separate, these two agencies. And the final thing, the real cherry in the cake, is that traditionally for the last like 20 years, senior members of the IOC have held senior membership positions within WADA. So you have literally a company that's trying to sell tickets and convince the people that this is a squeaky clean sport, that this is fair competition, that this is good. And you have the organization trying to usurp that and find where the corruption is and find where the doping is, but you have them being ran by the same small circle of 10 to 20 people, you know. And
yeah, I think that's what you kind of see, and this is where I think, because I'll look at something like this and I'm like, okay, where is the corruption here? And I'm like, you know, in the same way that like I don't know if you've ever watched the film The Big Short, where like about the 2008 housing crash, and it's like only like at the end of the day only like one guy went to jail, even though like the housing market collapsed. And it's like,
yeah,
you can't point your finger and like locate the corruption.
no,
it just seems to like breed itself.
It proliferates
from
yeah.
like the idea of like money that's going down layers. You know, like the IOC are like, well, we don't want anyone to cheat, but we also want to make money, and those two things are like totally conflicting, because it's like, as you say, if world records are getting broken left, right, and centre, people are watching these, they're watching YouTube videos, they're tuning into the Olympics. You know, if I knew somebody was going to beat Usain Bolt's world record at 100 meters,
you'd be watching.
I'd be fucking watching that. You know, and so you can see how that would sort of like drive revenue, but at the same time they want to come across as like really, like, as you say, like squeaky clean organizations. But the corruption doesn't like breed itself from any like one person. You can't look at people and be like, oh, it's you that's doing it. I think it's just like the pressure from like make more money, like how much money do you make the last time? How can we make more money this time? It kind of breeds this like really nasty environment where like you're like, oh, but we should have like an auditing agency, and then it's like, but we fund that, and also we don't want it to do its job, because it does, we'll have less good athletes.
Yeah. It's like, imagine if someone tells you, like, it's like you have a position within both companies, and you find out that there's like a lead that perhaps like the fucking Mongolian football team or something like that are all doping, but you happen to know that next year they're going to bring in X amount of money. It's a hard call to make and say that, you know, morally we should be making a decision to stop these actions. Financially, we will take a hit. Do you think any one person that's in a high management position in one of these like literally global agencies would ever ever make that decision. It's just like you can't.
Well, they did, Lewis, when they booted Russia out six years ago, and then Russia haven't been in the Olympics this.
Well, that's the funny part actually. It's because I actually did read into what happened to Russia and why the fuck they're in the Olympics. It's because after Sochi came about, it was decided that Russia should get a 4-year ban, and it was WADA that said this. It turns out WADA, they're obviously the anti-doping agency, and they looked into it and they confirmed that yes, without a doubt, there are thousands of athletes that have been doping here over the last couple of years. It was the lead scientist of the Russians that actually went whistleblowing in the end. So it was actually like undoubtable, and it'd been going on for decades. As I said, thousands of athletes, and I can understand how it'd be quite a difficult decision deciding how you go about punishing them. But at the end of the day, they chose 4 years. We'll ban you. You will ban the Russians, all of your team members, for 4 years. Turns out though, WADA, the agency that upholds doping standards, doesn't have the authority to sanction. All they can do is recommend to the IOC that they should be sanctioned. And if the Russian team wants to dispute this, they can then go to another company called CAS, which is the Court of Arbitration in Sports or something like that. Basically, it's like where you go to reach these disputes. And unfucking surprisingly, the people that own senior membership positions in the IOC and in WADA also hold them in CAS, this court. So basically, this was in this court system. The Russians ended up arguing their case, and their ban was reduced to a measly 2 years. They weren't able to compete competitively in the sport, which they wouldn't be doing anyway, and they weren't allowed to use nationalistic flags. So they weren't allowed to use like their national anthem, weren't allowed to use their flag. But every single competitor is allowed to compete. So this is, and as one thing I should have mentioned at the start as well, Russia apparently are like notoriously corrupt when it comes to sports. Like, I think one of the previous presidents of Russia had a position on the IOC. You know, like they're really, really deeply into it. So it was one of these blatant cases of corruption, allowing this team to go ahead effectively scot-free and just keep doing what they're fucking doing. So it's like, it's one of those situations where you'd look around, you'd see that people were actually being caught doping. Nothing's happening about it. You'd fucking start doping yourself, wouldn't you?
Yeah, maybe. At that point, it becomes like a point of integrity, doesn't it? It's like, do you start doping because everybody else is doing it, or do you try and uphold your values, I guess, and still try and like win a medal?
Take the L.
It's just fucking sad, because it seems like the Olympics should be this togetherness, and I kind of think like, you know, the World Cup in football should be the same as well, where I'm like, I don't think people should be like making money from this, you know. It's good for the country that hosts it. They get tourism and all that stuff. There's money like getting pumped in, like that's good. But surely, like, the athletes and the sport should be kept separate from that stuff. Like, I personally think that, like, when the football World Cup comes around and like players play for their country, I don't think they should be like making money from that. That should be like a, you know, if I was a footballer, I played for my club, like, I make enough money anyway, you know. And like, if the World Cup comes around and I'm like, yeah, I want to play for Scotland, you know, I want to go and do that, like, represent my country. That seems like a something that you should be doing at like Pride, and it seems like it would be good for the world to have things like this, where all these countries kind of come together and celebrate these sports and participate in this event and, you know, interact in this way. It's like a good sort of, it would keep relations up as well, right? If you were like interacting with those countries all the time, yeah.
It's like healthy nationalism. That's exactly what it is. It's an opportunity for people to come together while simultaneously celebrating who they are. It's like so deeply cultural, and it's all to do with literally the foundation is it like bettering yourself and becoming the best, becoming peerless. It's like such a noble goal and ambition, and such a great, brilliant idea. Like the idea that this isn't available for people free to watch across the entire country does, like, it really pisses me off. It's one of those things I feel that it should be, it's so important to people, and it's just such a brilliant opportunity. But it's the same question as always, man. It's like, see, if people aren't making money, how's it going to happen, you know? Unless the Olympics become a fucking charity, and they'll probably stop giving out gold medals once that's the case anyway. But
well, are the medals made out of gold right now?
Yeah,
are they made out of pure gold right now, are they?
I actually thought that I heard a rumor that like even the silver and the gold, silver and bronze are made of gold. They were just plated.
All right, okay. Well, that's why they do the whole like biting down on it, isn't it? Because
Yeah, yeah,
you're
yeah,
supposed to be
yeah.
able to
To see if
score
it's
it or
real,
whatever.
because it's soft, because it's supposed to like 18 karat gold. Yeah.
Yeah, aye. Yeah, I kind of like the idea of that though. The Olympics becoming like a charity thing. You know, because
Mhm.
you can see how the country that hosts it would still benefit. You know, they still own the stadiums. They still own all the shops around like where the Olympics are held. The tourists that are coming in, they'd be spending their money there. They'd
Yeah,
be
sure,
like burning their
sure.
money through the economy. You can see that home nation still making a bit of money. But like the
Yeah.
IOC, the Olympics itself, just becoming like a charitable like body where it's like the Olympics is going to make money. Like maybe the country that hosts it like pays the money into the IOC, and that pays for like the Olympics, and then they make their money back on like tourism and all that kind of stuff. I can imagine that might be like a decent deal for the countries. But how on earth would you get the IOC to turn into a charitable body when it makes so much fucking money?
Right, exactly. Yeah, but it seems to like be fucking yet literally laughing with money every 4 years. I don't know. I agree. It seems like I like the idea. But by the way, I just looked up. Olympic medals have to be at least 92% silver. This year they're made of 100% gold, though, which has been recycled by the people of Japan. Uh, so I don't know. The question I have though is that like even if it were to become charitable and become like humanitarian and like much less focus on money, I still can't help but feel there will inevitably be people doping
Oh yeah,
for
yeah,
so that's the question. It's like how part of me kind of feels that like what we need to do to help this issue is that like the organization in charge of this needs to have like much like fucking it needs to be given teeth for one thing, and it needs to like people need to be made an example of, right? You know, like it's the type of thing where you'll say to Russia, like every one of your athletes that was doping, they're never going to compete in sport again, you know. And
yes,
then
aye.
that's the only way that this will ever fucking change, right?
Yeah. I think there is something to be said for that. You know, these athletes that you know, because they know they're doing it. That's the thing about it. They know they're doping, and it's like, especially for like Russia to have been doing it as a country and to have only gotten like a 2 year ban. You know, they should have been like not appearing at like 3 Olympics. You know,
Right,
it
yeah.
should have been like 12 years, where it's
10
like
years,
you know
yeah.
you're just not coming anymore until all of the athletes are now out of commission. Like they're too old to participate in the Olympics now. It's now a whole new generation of athletes, and if they're doping, like if it comes back to it, like it's going to be an even like bigger ban. You know,
You get nuked.
I wouldn't have any sympathy for an athlete if they were to get a
Really?
lifetime ban for doping, because you know it's you're sort of like signing up for that. You know, when you go to the Olympics or you take part in your sport, like a competitive sport that's based on
Hmm.
fair play, you're signing up to play fair, you know. And if you don't play fair, it's like you're out. Like I don't think there should be any like room for you just booted out the door, you know, fuck off.
Yeah. I totally agree with you, but in the same perspective, the argument, and I think this is the argument that the Russians made in court, is that the actual athletes themselves, it's kind of hard to hold them accountable if they were told if you want to stay in this team, you need to fucking take PEDs, you know? It's like there must have been a huge degree of like pressure to conform. As I said, there was like thousands of athletes that were doing this, and every single one of them that was in the Russian team was doping. How I can understand definitely how the responsibility at that sort of scale, I feel it's as hard to blame the individual to that degree when it was so obviously sanctioned by the state. But I don't see any other way about it. Unless you do punish them, I don't see any way of sending a message that's harsh enough to convince anyone not to do this themselves.
Yeah, I feel like if you gave Russia like it's a 12 year flat ban and they just weren't in the next 3 Olympics or whatever it was,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
maybe they weren't allowed to host it for the next maybe they're like
Ever.
due to host it. Well, maybe
Yeah.
they're like due to host it soon, and you're like, nah, it's going somewhere else now, sort of thing.
Hmm.
I think, like, yeah, I guess there must be a tremendous amount of pressure on the athletes to like take the performance enhancing drugs, but
That's what I think.
they're still doing it. You know, I still don't. You know, at what point do you hold them like responsible, even though they are still like taking the drugs, but they have the pressure?
That's a difficult thing.
Surely there would be a lot of backlash as well for like the Russian government and for these organizations if like they were to be banned for 12 years, and like there was like thousands of athletes that just lost their opportunity to ever go to an Olympics, and it's like that would come with a certain amount of backlash, right? Surely like
You would hope
the
so.
Russian people would like rise up against that, you know, start a
Well,
civil war,
I'm
shake up the fucking
I don't think that's how it works in Russia. I
No,
think
probably not.
the story that the Russians are told is very, very different to the story we are told. I don't think they will. I have a funny feeling it would be like, the evil West stop Russia because we're too powerful type of thing.
Sure. Yeah, I get that impression as well. I've seen a couple of like TV shows that like show you the sort of like Russian coverage of like some things, and it's like
Yeah.
it's like kind of propaganda-ish. It's sad, to be honest.
Yeah, well, that's basically like Stalin was the fucking, the master of propaganda. He managed to change the perceptions of like millions upon millions of people. So like the Russians are doing it to this very day. So I can understand how to help this issue, you definitely want to start enforcing stronger rules. But to me, like it's kind of similar to this idea of like making this a charity-based system. Like, how can you possibly uproot corruption when all the companies and all the organizations that deal with this?
It's absolutely,
like, it's not.
The Olympics is like probably, now that these doping scandals have started and it's about making money, it's like unredeemable now. I don't think you do that anymore. I think it's just, it is what it is, and you just have to enjoy the Olympics for what it is. There's no longer like turn this into a charity. Like, that doesn't happen.
Yeah. That's super sailed. Well, that's the thing I was thinking to myself is I fucking wrote down here. It's like, see, at this stage, why don't we just let them dope up whatever the fuck they want? Like, just make it legal. And that'll become part of it. Just give everyone the same drugs. I don't know, man. Like,
maybe like you could even like put them into the second category. It's like, do you want to watch this guy run the 100-meter dash in 10.5 seconds, or do you want to watch this guy do it in 4? Like,
yeah, exactly. They're pumping plutonium up his arse or whatever.
They have to like increase the size of the stadium to like do the javelin and stuff like that, and the long jump.
Yeah, folk are like breaching orbit now.
They're doing the pole vault now without the pole, sort of thing.
yeah. It's trying to vault to the other side of the stadium. I know. No, that's what I'm kind of worried at this stage. I always understand that like using these drugs must be dangerous. I don't know, because a lot of this is like unregulated shit and that, but it seems like it's never going to stop, and it just seems like one of those things. But I don't know.
I'm imagining some guy getting like jacked up on steroids, all the performance drugs you can imagine, run the 100 meters in 4 seconds, and then like dying at the end. Literally just keels over and dies after getting the world record,
It takes a grand total of like 3 steps the entire time. He just flies over the 100 meters. Exactly. And then collapses at the other side, like 20 meters past the 100-meter line.
Yeah, it's such a shame though. Like I say, like watching this woman win a gold medal for like her country for the first time it's ever had. Like, she's the best athlete this country's ever produced. She's got a gold medal at the Olympics. Like, she was like so far ahead as well at the end of the race that she had like a lot of time. As she was like coming down like the straight, and she was like looking behind her, and there was like nobody behind her. She was like going towards the finish line. She like took off her glasses, and she couldn't
Could
believe
not believe
that she won a gold medal at the Olympics. Somebody from this little tiny wee country that she's from. Like, it's such like an amazing moment, to see stuff like that, to watch these people win medals and be so excited about it.
I know
that's like a really, it seems like a pure like happiness feeling. There's not a lot of like, you feel so proud of yourself to have like done that, to have worked to get to this stage, and that it must be such like a base emotion. It's like a pure happy emotion. These fucking corporations are taking away all this.
Well, that's what I mean, dude. I this is like my fucking cynicism coming out again. It's because my main takeaway from this conversation was that woman was probably doping. I don't know, man. It really that's the main takeaway I've had thus far, is that I'll be watching every fucking competitor in the Olympics now and saying, is she doping? Maybe he's stupid.
Well, you can reliably think that they're all on something, like they're all taking medically sanctioned medication, I don't know. It's still, I guess it's still fun to watch. I still like to watch.
Oh, yeah, well, I know. Yeah.
And if they're not taking any of the substances that are on the banned list, like, I'm kind of like half at the point where, if like what you're taking isn't like medically necessary, then you probably shouldn't be taking anything. Like, I don't understand why there's like a banned list and like a non-banned list where like these are the substances you can take. And it's like, why can you take them if they're like,
yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing. Like, it's not fucking clear cut, man. Like, see, inhalers, they're performance enhancing. They increase your respiration.
Sure, but those are like,
people need to take
those
them.
are quite clearly like medically sanctioned. You know what I mean? Whereas like,
that's the thing. See, like Tour de France, they're banned. You can't take an inhaler for like months coming up to the Tour de France. It's because
I was really looking forward to winning that.
I know. Fucking, I was betting on you as well, but I remembered. Fucking idiot.
I hate cycling now.
Yeah, and there's that as well.
Yeah,
yeah.
I just don't. I can understand like the medically sanctioned ones, but I bet you they all, as well. The drugs that are like legal. I bet you they probably get doctors to like medically sanction them to the athletes so that they can just
Yeah,
take
yeah,
them
yeah,
anyway.
yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Yeah, fuck it. We'll just watch the Olympics. Just forget about it. The whole doping
Yeah,
scandal. Nothing we can do about it.
yeah. Well, that's
Get
the
the
big
Russians
takeaway.
back
You
in.
know? Yeah, exactly. Fuck it. Why? Because why the fuck not? We're not going to stop you. They're probably going to go back to tricks next year, so fuck it.
Yeah, absolutely no doubt about that.
Yeah. So, interesting one. And maybe just worth thinking about when we're looking at the Olympics and wonder why the fuck the Russians are back.
Yeah, because in the coverage they keep on, like, I'm watching the BBC and they keep on talking about the Russian athletes and they're like Russia. Oh, I mean the Russian Olympic Committee, and it's like even you guys know, like, you're not
Yeah,
even fucking
exactly. You know
trying.
this is a fucking sham here.
Yeah, they're like the Russians. I mean, the Russian Olympic Committee, and it's like we know they're Russian. Doesn't fucking matter. And
Yeah.
there was like I think the Russian gymnastics team like won the men's group event as well, and they were showing, there was like shot of them and they were all like celebrating, like on the floor, like crying, tears of joy, stuff like that. And I'm like, you guys are full of the drugs. Look at you.
Yeah.
You can't keep your emotions in check. That's
How can you
jacked at your tits you are. He's not crying tears. It's like this creamy liquid that's coming out of his eyes.
Each one of them's like absolutely pinging, man. They're losing their mind.
Yeah, you think that's chalk on their hands? No, sir.
Go up to a big barrel of it before the race, slap it about.
Dunks his head straight at it. Comes out, wipes his eyes, and he goes in the bars. He's like,
Yeah, exactly. Throws himself, shoots through the roof.
yeah, he's on the pommel horse. He's like twisting himself around. No person does that without being jacked at their nut.
Ah, no, man. That's not fucking humanly possible.
Exactly.